Hey, it's Eric Scott, and it's another Mixed Media Monday. I'm so glad that you could tune in and join me again today as I make a tiny mixed media piece. Today, I think I'm going to keep it a little bit more abstract. I had somebody request either a crack image or sort of using a web-like image that I've done before. So I think I'm going to do the web image today, but we'll see how it goes. Let's go ahead and get started, and I'll switch it over. So I've got my 4x4 inch mixed media paper. It's a nice heavy but smooth paper that's really great for the watercolor and the paints and the ink and the collage, everything that I do. I've got a couple brushes, and I've got one of my favorite things to use. Last week I used the punchinella, the little circles. This is a grid. This is the plastic mesh, also known as plastic canvas. And it's something that my grandmother used to stitch yarn through, but I love using it as a stencil. So I thought I'd go ahead and start out with that today. Anyway, the nice thing is that this is about the same size as my paper. And I'm going to get a little bit of paint. I don't want to have a whole lot of water. Let's go ahead and, I'm feeling kind of brown today. Um, just take a paintbrush. You want to make sure it's a nice stiff bristle brush, and I'm going to tap in. So the idea is that this mesh is pretty thick. The punchinella and the letter stencils that I've used before are all kind of a thin plastic. This is a lot thicker. So if I just sort of paint over it, it's not going to work. So I really have to tap into it and get the paint into all the little holes. But again, I'm not going to do every single hole. And even though the brown's kind of a dark color, I'm trying to work pretty quickly so it doesn't dry and remain dark. So let's go ahead and pull that up. All right, I like how that looks. So I'm going to take my brush, and I've rinsed it out, and I'm just going to take and spread this paint around. And so some of that paint's still wet, but some of it has had time to dry and it's not going anywhere. So I use the Derwent Inktense paints, and like their Inktense pencils, the paint is a little bit more permanent once it dries. And so I can paint pretty vigorously over top of the parts that are pretty dry, and it's not really gonna go anywhere. So anyway, but that just sort of mutes the squares, kind of knocks them back a little bit, not so dark. But I think, before I dry that, let me go ahead and mix in a little bit of this yellowish, this kind of yellow ochre. I forget what Derwent calls it, but it's basically a yellow ochre. And we'll just kind of mix that in. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit that with my hair dryer to dry it real quick. Okay. I want the color to be a little brighter. That's a little muted. So let's turn to the pencils. So these are the Inktense pencils, some of my favorites to use. And I'm looking for a very specific color called mustard. And it's kind of like a yellow, it's kind of like a yellow ochre, but not quite. I should have grabbed it out before I started, but oh well. That's part of the fun, right? Trying to find what you need. There we go. You can see I use this pencil quite a lot. So this is going to give me some kind of brighter golden yellowish color. So it's called mustard. It Right now it kind of looks like a tan, kind of like a light brown. But once I activate it with water, it's going to change a little bit. That's one thing with the Derwent Inktense pencils, is that they change a little bit whenever they're wet. I've used them enough to kind of know like what they're going to look like and anticipate that. So I'm thinking about a circle here, but then I thought, I think I'm going to cut out a map that maybe I want to glue there. So I'll do that one later. Let's go ahead and change brushes. You can see how that's just much brighter. It's not a brown. It's not like a bright yellow, like a yellow mustard, but it definitely gives us a nice bright golden color. So I don't know if I've talked about the Derwent Inktense pencils before on this series. I know I've championed them. I championed them before and really talked them up. They're my favorite. They are a water-soluble ink pencil. So whereas Derwent also makes a watercolor pencil, but I never actually used them. But watercolor is it's basically watercolor paint in a pencil form. So this works just the same way, but it's more of a water-soluble ink, and they claim that they're more permanent once they dry. I like them because they're completely transparent. I mean, the darker colors, of course, are a little bit more opaque, but they don't mix white in. A lot of times with watercolor pencils, some of the lighter colors have white mixed in, and they just have this kind of weird, not I guess opacity. They look a little bit kind of foggy. But anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and dry that. And like I said, I think I want to use a map. So I'm just grab one of my scraps of maps. This is probably the one I used in a previous episode of Mixed Media Monday. But then cut that off. And I'm not too worried about making it a perfect circle, just like I wasn't too worried about it whenever I drew those other 3 circles with the Inktense pencil. Okay, so I think that's going to go kind of there. Just trying to decide. I think it might be a little big. Let's go ahead and trim it down a little bit. It's a little bit better. All right, grab my glue stick and my paper. There. And I'm going to take that same mustard pencil and I'm going to go around the map. That's just going to help kind of balance it out and bring that color all over, basically up to the whole composition, the whole piece. Okay, let's go ahead and dry that. Kind of feeling like I want some black lines in there. Let's see. Grab my extra super fine Pitt artist pen. I think what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and sort of look at the roads on the map and have them extend beyond. So this is a great way to sort of tie the collage and the map image into the piece a bit more. But then those lines can kind of spread out and help divide up the space, break up the space a little bit. Okay. Okay, I'm liking that. So I'm trying to decide what color. I want to do this web kind of imagery. And I originally was thinking blue, but now that I look at that, let's see what I got. I think I'm going to pull out my, this is a magenta. It's a kind of a dark magenta. I think this might be good. So when I do this web imagery, I could actually use the black lines that I've started, but that I've already put on there. But I'll go ahead and do some new lines. And a lot of times with this web imagery, it starts out pretty random, but I think I wanted to sort of radiate out from the circle. And this imagery developed quite a while ago. 4, 5, 6 years ago, maybe even more. And it grew out of a painting of a tree. And I was actually painting it with red. I was doing just kind of like a winter like tree, but I was using red watercolor. And of course, with the red, it really had this kind of circulatory system, kind of blood vessel kind of feel to it. And I really liked that kind of feel. And so I started experimenting with this imagery, and it was just really kind of randomly crisscrossing lines. And that's kind of what I do. I kind of throw in some random lines, or I branch off things, kind of like veins, or like a tree, or like a river. And I even did an entire series called Home, where I used the web imagery and I used maps, because I think these lines really kind of echo maps as well. Might be interesting to kind of extend the red lines from the map. But anyway, so as I was doing this, I came up with a rule, and this was just something I developed. Like I said, I don't know how many years ago I kind of did this. But the rule was there could be no sharp corners. So anywhere like lines met, I'd have to round that off. So that's what I'm kind of doing right now, going in and kind of rounding off. So I go over all the lines that I've drawn, and I round off the corners where the lines meet or where lines intersect. And I've been doing it for years. And then here recently, I discovered that there's an art form that uses this kind of same thing. I always, I based it on maps, but also like that idea of blood vessels. But now I see it's a lot of people base it on kind of the nerve connections. And I've heard it called norography, and that idea that it's a like a neuron, like a the brain cells are neurons, and so it's like I've never done that like specifically, but it looks very similar to this web that had done, and I was like, oh, is that what this is called? Is this have I been doing this neurography for years and not known that that's what it's called, or was this sort of something that's somebody else kind of came up with, but sort of had some similar rules that I had. That idea of the lines crisscrossing, and wherever they crisscross, you make them curved, and so it's really interesting. I've seen it a lot over the last year, and to the point where I'm seeing like with art teachers in public schools are doing it with their students, or seeing it online, and some people sort of equate it with Zentangle and Zen doodling, but they're definitely different ideas. But this notion that you can be mindful with what you're doing, and a couple weeks ago, I did a whole thing about mindful mark making, and this can definitely be that because it takes a while. But just kind of going over and like retracing lines, adding lines, but always that notion of curving where they intersect, having the rounded corners. And when I do this, I always try to play with thin and thick. So trying to have some lines and some areas that are really thick, some that are thin, and then also playing with the negative spaces. So having a space that is larger, a negative space that's larger, and some that are smaller. And just so that with the thin and the thick and the large spaces versus smaller spaces, you just have a nice variety. And so something like this, the lines are pretty much random, but I just make sure that they crisscross. Oftentimes, kind of thinking about mapping marks. Like I said, I did a whole series where I used actual maps, and the roads became the lines. And so I've always noticed that it had this very organic feel to it, like it was some kind of like tissue or blood vessels, just something about it. And then to kind of see this norography, I don't know if I'm saying that right. It was just kind of an interesting thing to see. And it was like, oh, so what I do actually has a name. But like I said, I don't know if there might be rules to the norography that I don't follow. I mean, I'm doing my own thing. That idea of having these random lines that crisscross and create this web. So if you're familiar with that norography, let me know in the comments. If you've got links, that's awesome. Yeah, I've been saying norography, but I wonder if it's like norography. Is that how you pronounce it? I've kind of only read about it. That's why I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. So the nice thing about using this around the map, that it really radiates out from that circle of the map, and it really makes that map the focal point. And then having the bold lines just really draws attention to that circle. I mean, I'm only about halfway through, but you can really see that. So I think kind of like out here where it's further away, I just kind of want the lines to maybe be a little bit thinner and fewer. And so then that way they're really concentrated around the map. And that's going to really draw the eye directly into that. So having all these lines that kind of come out from the circle of the map, it's kind of like, arrows pointing directly saying, look here, look here. So this does take a while. Like I said, it's that kind of perfect mindful mark making opportunity. You could just really get lost in making the lines and the marks. And it can take a while, especially if you have a big piece. And I'm using a fairly thin pen, and I like that. I like using a thinner pen because then I can really get a variety of lines. I'm not using a real thick pen that's going to just give me all thick lines. But with a thinner pen, I can go back over and make some thicker and some thinner. Okay, just kind of look it over. I think I want to add another line over here. Yeah, I like that. So I think that kind of wraps it up for today. So let me go ahead and grab my pen and I'll sign the bottom. But yeah, so kind of kept it simple, kept it a little bit more on the abstract side, but I just really like how that web radiates out from that circle of the map that sort of builds off of some of the roads that are there. Really helps kind of tie it together. Um, but yeah, so I think we'll call that one done. Well, that's kind of it. So just sharing something a little bit different today, keeping it a little bit more abstract, not using too many kind of recognizable things other than the map. And then that web kind of imagery, it's kind of recognizable. People say, oh, it's kind of like blood vessels or some kind of tissue, or very organic, but it's not recognizable like, oh yeah, this is the thing that I was making. It's a little bit more ambiguous, and I think that ambiguity with it kind of makes it a little bit more intriguing, because you do look at it and you go, oh well, it sort of looks like this, it might be kind of this. And so then you have to kind of play around, or kind of think about like, well, what is it, what is this about, why is this here? And I kind of think about that juxtaposition of the web imagery next to the map, and thinking about, well, the web imagery kind of reminds us of arteries and blood vessels, but then when we talk about maps, a lot of times we talk about roads as arteries. And so there's this sort of relationship between those two things. So anyway, so this piece could be about that notion of arteries, of maps, of roads, of pathways, kind of thing. So anyway, um, I hope you enjoyed it. And I mean, I know I enjoy coming and just like sitting down, spending no more than 30 minutes or so, kind of making something, just trying to show people just how easy it is to kind of dive into some of this stuff, and build up layers and create images from this mixed media stuff. So always, like, if you always wonder like what I use, and you weren't taking notes during the episode, I do put that in the comments. And then also, I'd love for folks to check me out on social media, so you can find that in the comments, in the notes as well. But yeah, definitely thank you so much for tuning in and joining me for another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And I'd love to see what you're all making. So if you've been making stuff, tag me in social media posts. Definitely would love to see if you've been kind of following along and making some of your own things. So anyway, thank you so much, and see you next week. And as always, happy creating.